This is Tim, and this is Deconstructing Comics. Welcome to a special Thursday edition of Deconstructing Comics. This is Tim in Tokyo. This time we're hearing from two old friends of the podcast, Irene Strychalski and Jason McNamara. Irene is currently penciling some issues of Marvel's Gwenpool. In September on social media, she published her 10 points about thumbnailing a comics page to make sure your storytelling is on point. So I asked her to come on the show and talk about it. Jason is the writer of such graphic novels as The Martian Confederacy and The Rattler, which he's talked about on this show in the past. I sat down with him when I was in Portland, Oregon in August to talk about his new job as creative consultant for the NBA's Golden State Warriors, and about diagnosing and dealing with the failure of a collaborative comics project. He had just had to pull the plug on a project that he and an artist had been laboring over for some time. How do you know when it's just not going to work? Irene on thumbnailing in a moment. First, just a reminder that you can help this podcast by making your Amazon purchases via deconstructingcomics.com/Amazon and make that your bookmark for future purchases. We'll then get a percentage of what you spend. It costs you nothing extra and helps us cover web hosting and the other costs of presenting this show every week. We really appreciate your support. I'm talking with Irene Strychalski down in Taiwan. How are you doing?
I'm great. Hello. Good to be back on again.
Yeah, I guess you haven't been on since you left Austin. You were on the 10th anniversary show. I think that was the last time.
Yeah. Time flies.
And now we're coming up on 12th anniversaries.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, really. What is happening to time?
Yeah, really. So Irene, well, recently as we're recording this, I have no idea when this is going up, but on September 10th, Irene on Twitter was posting 10 sort of are these guidelines, rules for doing thumbnails for a comic page.
Yeah.
So I thought it might be kind of fun to just go through these on the podcast. Now, and before we do that, so now you're still working on Gwenpool for Marvel?
Yes, that's what I'm currently working on. And the issues that I'm working on are out next month, which is, right now it's the end of September, so it's out in October. I have 3 issues. No idea what I'm working on after that, but yeah, that's my current gig.
Okay, and are they kind of like swapping you back and forth with another artist? How is that working schedule wise?
So I'm one of the obviously not the main artist. The main artist is Gurihiru, who is they're awesome and I love them. They're not really so much swapping me back and forth as I think Gurihiru is doing something else. I think they're busy with Power Rangers, so I'm sort of like a step-in, one of a couple artists that they have on when the main artist is too busy. I'm not important enough to be a main artist. I'm just a stand-in, working on it.
I see. Well, yeah, you got to start somewhere.
Yeah. It's no problem. I'm new. It's okay.
Okay, so let's see. So your first guideline. Do you have this in front of you?
I don't. I'm terrible. Let me.
Okay. Well, I've got it
you
up.
Have them right. Okay,
I'm looking at your Twitter page right now.
Oh, great.
So first one was how many panels are on a page? First thing to check. But now I had a question about this because I assume that, how do you know how many panels there are? Are you looking at the script? The writer has specified this, or?
Yes, on comic scripts, for most scripts, for most writers, especially for big publisher comics, they always specify panel 1 description dialogue, panel 2 description dialogue, And the general rule is like around 5 to 6 panels a page is pretty standard for American comics, and it's different in manga, different for European comics. But on comic strips, it looks just like a movie script, basically. Many more people have seen that. Like, not a lot of people have seen comic scripts, but it's like a movie script, but with like things are broken down into panels.
Okay.
Yeah. So the first thing generally you look at, and this is also like most of this is stuff I learn in school because I went to school for comics and animation, but also just from like doing a lot of thumbnails, you learn a lot of this. Like first thing you want to see is like how many panels and sort of just mentally work out like the layout, like run through any layout options that like your options for layouts in your mind as you read through, and then depending on what's like the description and which panels have more dialogue, more dialogue means more space is needed, then you adjust the panel sizes accordingly.
Mm-hmm.
Sort of getting ahead, but yeah.
Right. Well, that's actually point 2. Yeah. Which panels have more dialogue? More dialogue equals needs more space.
Yeah, these are sort of really basic points for doing thumbnails, but I sort of, it's one of the things I get asked a lot because I feel like most people don't have any idea what comic strips look like or any idea how to like transfer, like writing to drawings, and it's sort of it's like a mysterious process that not a lot of people talk about because people talk about drawing a lot, like just, how to draw well. And like that's great. It's really important. And there's a lot of resources for that online, but perhaps there aren't as many resources for like storytelling because storytelling is hard. And it's like most comic artists learn on the job with storytelling. You learn as you go. And there are a couple of good books on that, such as like Scott McCloud's books and Understanding Comics, but they're few and far between.
Right, yeah, because I think people tend to think, maybe unless they're really involved in it, just think that the artist needs to be good at drawing, making things look realistic and whatever, and but storytelling is another dimension to it that you wouldn't have so much like in drawing a pinup or something.
Definitely, it's a whole other dimension. That's a good way to put it. And it's a lot more than just making things look pretty.
Yeah. Okay.
And most of that is done in thumbnails. Like thumbnailing is so the drawing is the easy part, like making things look pretty and like all the perspective. I mean, doing buildings, I like doing buildings, so I don't mind that. But like that's honestly the easiest part. Like writing is like getting started at like the beginning, just not like laying solid groundworks for your story. That's hard. Writing all the dialogue and like the prose and action, that's a lot of fun. And then thumbnailing is probably just as hard as getting started, or one of the hardest parts of doing comics, because it's like a lot of brain work. You have to make sure the story comes across like the right way. You have to make sure storytelling is clear. It's like doing storyboards, but you also have to take into account like how things flow on a comic page, because it's not the same as a movie screen. It's similar, but there's an extra dimension to the whole design and cohesion for the comic that you have to keep in mind.
Right, like knowing which way the eye is going to want to go, and sometimes people put the panels in a way that you like. Well, which one is next now? Do I go over here? Do I go down here? I'm confused, and you don't want that to happen.
Yeah. There's a lot. There's a lot that's just practice, but there are some basic rules that you can learn so you don't have to make as many mistakes before you start thumbnailing well. But let me not get ahead. Let you ask the questions.
Okay, right. But yeah, so we're talking about thumbnailing. I mean, the like making stuff look pretty is what's after this. This is all just about storytelling and readability.
Yeah, this is pure storytelling. Just very important.
Yeah. Okay, number 3. Which panels have the most action? More action equals usually multiple figures equals bigger panels.
Yeah. Again, these are like sort of really simplified rules and sentences that I broke it down to, but which I try to, like, it makes it easier to remember, and also I was like, I wanted to put this out on Twitter.
Right, yeah, it's Twitter.
So short messages. So yeah, usually you want to see like first you see how many panels are on a page, which panels have more dialogue, and the thing with action panels, usually you have People don't talk as much when they're fighting, unless it's manga. But I don't. People, if it's yeah, I didn't. But I don't
Well, if it's
draw.
Chris Claremont X-Men, they
Yeah,
spout whole soliloquies in one punch.
yeah, that's right. Okay, so Chris Claremont and any shonen manga, this rule does not apply because people do just give speeches while they fight. But generally,
So most action and most dialogue.
yeah, yeah, that's amazing. But in general rule, in most comics, if people are fighting, there's not a lot of dialogue. But you do need, more space and like, there's sort of, if you've done a lot of comics, you sort of instinctively know like there's a sort of unwritten rule that if the like fight scenes will just you can have one page of script but when you draw it out, it'll take up 5 pages in the comic because it's just all action shots. And I feel like the same with movies. Like you can have like a short description of 2 people fight, they throw several punches, and one person throws another person down the side of a building into a trash can, and like 5 million Green Goblins come in, and then it's like it's really easy to write, and it's short on the written script is short, but when you draw it, it's a lot of work, and it also takes up a lot of panels and a lot of space. Mm-hmm. So yeah, action will usually take up more space. Something to keep in mind.
Okay. 4. Which panels need backgrounds? And then in parentheses, mostly avoid having 2 panels on the same page with the same perspective and focal length.
Yeah. So you don't want to have backgrounds on every single panel on your comic page, even though that might like look cool and that might like be impressive if you just really want to show off. It would take away from the overall cohesion and just like the viewer's comfort of viewing a page, because you don't want to clutter it too much. Like I think I make a point in several of these points, I bring up like you want to not do the same thing in every panel unless it's a special effect. Like if you just like the same panel is repeating and like a small thing changes in there, that's like sort of a special effect that some comic artists use to express, I guess, like shock or make the reader linger on a moment longer. That's one of those special effects that like it's okay to have just the same exact background and same exact characters for like 8 panels in a row. But usually on most pages you don't want the same background angle, and you don't want the same like head size, and you don't want the people to have the same pose or the same like focal length, just to keep things interesting. Mm-hmm. Because if like it just looks really bad and it looks boring if every one of your panels, even if it's different characters, it's the same exact like body size and same exact background and same perspective. There's this thing they really drill in you when you're learning to do comics: keep it interesting. So the rule is you have to, if you're good at storytelling, you can make even 2 people just talking to each other for 20 pages really interesting to look at. Mm-hmm. And it's not just the dialogue that makes it interesting. Visually, if you just take out the dialogue, it would still be interesting, and just 2 people sitting in a cafe and talking for 20 pages straight. So then that's when the storytelling comes in. That's where like the creative thinking comes in. What cool angles can you shoot like these 2 people talking from? What cool framing devices? Maybe you can draw the people through like from outside through a window panel, maybe a low angle, like looking up at them in a really high tension shot, or like an over the shoulder shot. Mm-hmm. Where one person is a lot bigger than the other to like sort of show maybe there's like a power dynamic. There's all these things that you can think about to you have to keep in mind how the way you draw things makes the readers feel. So you want it to be interesting, and you want the story and the mood to be conveyed in your drawings.
Okay.
Is that clear? No.
Yeah. When you say focal length, you're talking about the distance between like our where we are sort of and where the figure is.
Yeah. Yeah, basically. It's like a fancy term for just like distance.
Yeah.
It's like a photography term for distance. It's basically same distance. Like I didn't want to say perspective because that can be like 2-point perspective, 3-point perspective. That's not really that important. Like as in just like the distance of the background. Like
Yeah,
you can
like
have like a
the
close up.
point of view,
Yeah.
and
Yeah, the point of view. Like you can have like
how
a
far away.
white, yeah, like a wide shot of a city, or like a really close up shot of just like a window or a door. Like just like people, you can have like very different perspectives for like drawing backgrounds. So you want to vary that up a bit.
Yeah. So, like, what kind of panel would you not draw background in?
Maybe most close ups.
Yeah.
You can drop the background. Most close ups, I would, yeah. Or when if it's two people talking and I know there's going to be a lot of dialogue around them, and there you don't see the ground, especially like if it's 2 or 3 people, or just like it doesn't matter how many people, but if you don't see the ground, like you can sort of drop the background most of the time. But if you like, obviously if you see the ground, it'd be weird to not really have a background. But yeah, if it's a close up, like you don't have to force a background in every shot. Probably like 5 panels out of 5 panels, like 2 can have backgrounds, and so you don't sort of overwhelm the reader. And keep in mind that a lot of the background will be covered by like dialogue, so don't freak out too much about it.
Yeah. How do you balance that? Because there's some artists who sometimes really will skimp on backgrounds and not put them in when they should, and just look kind of lazy.
No, don't do that. Don't. Backgrounds are fun, and they're their own character. I understand that a lot of artists are, especially starting out, are intimidated by backgrounds, and sort of my gripe with it just takes a lot of time. Like I actually really enjoy drawing backgrounds, but they're really time consuming. So if I draw backgrounds just because I'm trying to meet a deadline, or like I'll just like, instead of like intricate beautiful windows and stuff, I'll just do a bunch of blocks, which that always works. but like don't yeah, I feel like backgrounds might be intimidating at first because most people start out drawing people because that's what we relate with. But I try to tell people to think of backgrounds as its own character, because that's what it is. And once you like sort of thinking about backgrounds as a character and a character in the story, and something that you can embellish and add small details to help further the comic and like what your character is doing, then it stops being so intimidating. It stops being a lot of fun. And really, when it comes down to like the technical part of it, it's just following a grid. Like drawing humans is a lot of geometry. It's like, oh, the head is sort of a ball with like a pointy cone on the bottom for the chin, and the body is a box, and arms are a series of cylinders, and backgrounds are just boxes. And as long as you learn how to grid up, find a vanishing point, and draw like all the windows and all the trees according to the perspective grid, it's technically not that hard. It just takes a lot of time.
Yeah. Okay, number 5. Avoid gutters, creating tangents in panel or to adjacent pages. Now, years ago, like many years ago, Mulele talked about tangents on the podcast, and that means like there's a line within the panel that, how do I explain it? Can you explain it? I'm having trouble describing it, but it like sometimes people will draw like there's a wall or something, and there's a line that's like right next to the panel border, and it sort of looks like a gutter, but it's actually part of the panel, and it's a little visually confusing.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's a pretty good description of it. It's sort of hard to describe like vocally instead of just showing someone with drawing, but basically it's when an object, whether it's person or a wall, but it runs parallel or is really, really close to the edge of a panel. And this can also happen outside of a panel, which is something that like most people learn pretty quickly, that you don't want to have, I don't know, like say, how do I, like say the arm of a person is just like 1 millimeter from the edge of a panel, and that just looks really bad. But you can also have tangents across panels and across pages. So when you're drawing your panels, keep sort of especially like at the thumbnail stage, keep in mind like where your panel gutters are on the page before and after the current page you're thumbnailing, and make sure they don't line up, because if it's when it's printed out, and this is more for print, like the cross page tangent thing. If you're doing strictly digital comics, you don't have to worry about this. But as a general rule, just to be safe, make sure your panel gutters aren't at the same height as the page next to it. So when it's printed, it won't look like it's a spread when it's like people don't start jumping to the page to like the next page before they're supposed to visually. Just you want to make things as easy as possible to read. You want to make someone that has never read comics can just like look at your pages and instinctively understand like which panel goes to the next and which action leads to, the next story point.
I see what you mean. Yeah, you don't want it to look like it's a row that goes across the spread, and when it actually doesn't. So, there were some. I don't know if he does this anymore, but sometimes in comics that Bendis wrote, he would have the artist do a spread, and sometimes it would be really confusing if it was. You would not realize it was a spread, and it actually was, and you'd get confused. But
right, yeah, exactly. And also, like, just within a comic page. Basically just avoid things lining up between panels and across pages and stuff. Mm-hmm. Which is pretty easy. It's sort of just a thing you check like after you finish every page.
Okay. 6. Action moves left to right, top to bottom for Western comics.
Pretty self-explanatory.
Yeah, although... well, now this can get especially... Now, you're talking about the art itself, but sometimes word balloon placement... people mess this up.
Yes, that's a very good point. Yeah, I don't do a lot of lettering, but yeah, that is something that letterers have to take into consideration as well, especially because it's text. And so basically, like you want the person that's speaking first to have the word balloon like at closer to the top left. And then, like, the person speaking next has a word balloon closer to the bottom right on every panel and, like, across the entire page as well. And like, when you're drawing, like, oh, that's another point that sort of leads into this I didn't put in because it wasn't, like, I guess I didn't think of it. But it sort of ties into this. When you're drawing, like, the actual figures, it also, you should also take into consideration who is speaking first, and that you try to have that person on the left side of the page. So when it's lettered, the letterer has an easier time, doesn't have to like crisscross word balloons and stuff.
Yes.
Or just if it's impossible, have like a down shot. Then it's really easy, and the word balloon can be anywhere. Like it doesn't matter if they're right or left, the word balloon can be to either side. So yeah, that sort of ties into this. But there's a lot of things that they teach you if you're learning sequential art, or you sort of just learn like on the go. There's more to just like having like word balloon placement, or like the motion itself should go from the top left to the bottom right. And when you're on the right side of a page, it helps to have an object on the right side to help bounce the reader's the flow back to the left on like the next row, if that makes any sense. This is really hard to describe just through audio, but yeah, like for example, when you're doing like on the first panel, or I wouldn't say the first panel, usually like especially if it's action, like most of the time you'll see when comic artists are drawing action scenes and stuff, people will be moving to the right. Mm-hmm. Like they'll be punching to the right, and they'll try to frame it so like the punch is going to the right. So the movement is all from the left to the right, and the reader's eye will look that way. And then something on the right of the panel, say a building or like something, stops the point of view, stops the flow, and bounces everything back. This is really hard to describe just audially, just through audio. But
so you're saying don't put the building there because it sort of breaks the flow, or
no, you can, like, it's that it I'm not saying you can't. No, that's a good thing. Like it's also okay to have something like on the right side to direct the read. Basically, you want to direct the reader's view.
Mm-hmm.
Like keep in mind where motion is going. Okay, that's a better way to put it. I totally didn't think through how I would actually explain this without actually showing through
in more than 140 characters.
Exactly. Like most of the time I'm like drawing something to show people this. So it's like, how do I just describe this over Skype? But yeah, so it's the motion. So say if there are cars on a road, or if like someone is flying through a city, for example, that's like a really good example. Like you want them to you want the direction they're flying to be towards the next panel you want the reader to look at. So I think that's a pretty good way to describe it.
Right. You don't want Superman flying right to left. It's sort of...
No, that would be really confusing. Yeah, that would be just like slightly off-putting, and especially if you do it every panel. Like even if the reader won't know what's wrong, I think especially like if you read English like Western readers, it'll just be like a weird off-putting sense. Like they'll sort of hesitate and not know like which panel to read next, and that breaks immersion. So it's sort of something to just make your comic more comfortable to read and make everything clearer. Like it's just the number one rule is to make everything really, really clear.
Okay. Let's see. 7. Vary, VARY, vary head sizes. Mostly avoid any two panels having characters at the same size on a page. And I didn't get your abbreviations here. 1 CU and 1 WS every page is what? I guess WS must be wide shot. Okay, close up and wide shot. Okay, got it.
Yeah. Twitter abbreviation, short, whatever. Yeah, so close up and wide shot. I think I sort of mentioned this earlier when I was like talking too much about point 1, but yeah, just like the rules for drawing backgrounds and perspective, sort of vary the size of the person, like the people in every panel. And the way they teach you it in when you're learning comics is head size, which is a pretty good rule to go by. But like general, like the size of the figure is another way to put it. Like you don't want the figures in every panel to be the exact same size, and that ties back to the point of that being very boring. And you don't want anything to be boring. You want the pages to be dynamic and interesting, and you want every panel to feel like it's something new and it's a new perspective. So just keep things interesting and like make the story, not just the plot but the visuals of the story, interesting to look at. Keep in mind to try and draw people from different sizes and different angles and stuff in every panel as much as possible.
Okay. And you said 1 close-up and 1 wide shot every page is good. GUUUD. But we'll talk about spelling in another episode.
I know. That's my internet spelling. Yeah, that's a different issue. It's worthy of critique. But...
I guess it's pronounced good. Is that right?
Yeah. That's just Twitter talk.
Okay.
Sort of. Now I feel like that's not. I'm sorry.
Kids, we'll teach you how to spell good in the next episode.
I've violated rules of English by internet talk. Yeah, the whole 1 wide shot and 1 close up is like it's not a strict rule. Like if you do that for every page, it's not like you have to do that or your comic will be really boring to read. But that's sort of a thing that I have in the back of my head. I try to do that. Is basically what I'm saying.
Okay.
Like I definitely try to have a close up on every page.
Okay. Number 8. Double check if any panels would be stronger if shot from a more unconventional perspective. So how do you judge that?
That's sort of a thing that you go back and double check after you finish the thumbnails and the layouts for every page.
So what kind of unconventional perspective might you go with?
Yeah, for example, if you've already gone through all the previous rules and you've already finished the layouts for a page, it helps to just look back at it again and double check if you've met all the rules above. Double check if try to, really quickly just mentally try to read it from the point of view of someone that has never seen this page before, from the point of view of a reader, and see if everything flows and if they're looking to towards action and reading in a direction that you want them to read in. And if you notice that all your panels are sort of just like 1 point perspective, you can double check with yourself, like maybe this would be more interesting if I do a 3 point and just have an upshot, and which makes things look more dramatic, or have a downshot like when people are talking, because instead of just a straight on, the horizon is in the middle of the panel, which is sort of a very standard, very normal, calm way to shoot something. Maybe you can turn the camera really high up or really really low, or something I mentioned before, shoot the action through a framing device, say a window or through a car window or something creative like that. Basically, be creative with with the way you frame and shoot something. So
okay,
double check your work. Try to make things interesting and not boring.
Right. So yeah, by stronger you mean more visually interesting.
More visually interesting, yeah. Not boring is good.
Yeah. Okay. Yep. Sure. 9. Don't be afraid of drawing anything complicated. Don't let personal fears hinder your story.
Yeah, that's sort of my pep talk point. I don't know how much explaining that really warrants, but that's sort of, yeah, just you can do this point that I was trying to give people, because it sort of ties into doing backgrounds, because I had mentioned earlier doing backgrounds, and that I was referring specifically to drawing backgrounds and cars and stuff like robots and guns, and I think I elaborated on this a little more when I posted on Facebook, and because I did a sort of a longer version on Facebook. But yeah, that was sort of just, don't let your fear of drawing backgrounds or your fear of drawing cars and trains stop you from doing from shooting a shot or drawing a panel in the way that is best. Don't let your fears sort of hold you back from telling the story, because it's again to the point of excuse me, a lot of people are apprehensive about drawing backgrounds. I know it's intimidating to a lot of people, but your story will be better if you just tackle it head on and try, maybe you can do simpler backgrounds, but don't avoid drawing them. Don't avoid drawing hair because you're you don't know how to draw hair. You have to challenge yourself. I don't
draw
think anyone...
that horse.
Yeah.
I know horses are a big problem for a lot of artists.
Oh, I don't think they're that hard.
Yeah, along with cars, and I know that's low on the list of things that some artists like to draw, but
they're not that hard. But don't you want to challenge yourself? Okay, maybe I'm just sort of a freak, and I really like drawing these things that are I'm always, I don't know. So I guess I can bring up because I remember there was a time when I was also afraid of drawing backgrounds, and I started out just drawing figures like most people. I had back in middle school, my entire sketchbook were just filled with figures and people. But the comic series that I came across, it made me be oh my god, backgrounds are awesome, and I'm gonna love drawing backgrounds. And it was just a complete 180 on how I view drawing backgrounds was. Do you know Blame by Tsutomu Nihei? It's a manga. It's a super hardcore manga, science fiction comic by a mangaka called Tsutomu Nihei, and it's basically nothing but backgrounds. I think he has training in architecture. He's a trained architect, so the story is there's basically no story, which is the most amazing thing. It's just about sort of a cyborg dude wandering through a far futuristic sort of concrete jungle wasteland, the whole entire globe is covered in cities and just abandoned cities and huge cityscapes and floating structures and stuff. And he's just wandering through it for I think there's 10 volumes of it, and he was looking for a a child with special genetics or something, and there's like 2 paragraphs of dialogue in every volume of manga. But it was really interesting to look at, and like for some reason my like 15-year-old brain just really enjoyed that. So I started reading that, and it was by someone that had training in architecture and who just like had no fear at all of drawing backgrounds. And the backgrounds were so interesting because, like I said, they were like floating buildings and like just these giant long sci-fi corridors, and it was really creative, and like upside down cities and all other sort of wacky stuff. So if someone wants to sort of shake their fear of backgrounds, maybe that's a good book to check out. You'll realize that, it makes you feel like backgrounds are actually really fun to do, which they are. So.
And what's that book called again?
Blame. Blame. He's done a few other books, I think. Biomega is also by him. And I think, was Knights of Sidonia I am not sure if that's by him, but I think Knights of Sidonia is a newer work by the same artist.
But that one Tsutomu Nihei.
Right, but that one looks very different, and I think there's more story to it. Maybe he like worked on writing or something. But I actually was not as like roped in by that as Biomega and Blame. Probably because it's more manga-esque. Like the whole thing with Blame and Biomega it's really not manga-esque. It's sort of someone that like doesn't have a standard manga style doing comics. So I thought that was really interesting. Yeah, check out his work. It's really cool stuff.
Okay. And then your last point on Twitter, which is just kind of general encouragement category, draw a comic that you would want to own.
Yeah, draw a comic that you would want to own.
Right.
That's it.
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess, writers tend to follow that rule too, write the comic that you would want to read. So
Yeah, good writers follow that rule. I don't know if they really teach that enough in writing. I don't really think I was taught that when I was writing, but it's sort of something that came up, I think, in discussions with other people on like how to write well and how to make good products and good comics. And it sort of does boil down to that point. It's very pep talky and but it's also true. Like usually if it's something that you would want to read, and it's not just like, because a lot of people sort of write stories to express something. I think a lot of people take like creating something as like their creative endeavors as, oh, I'm expressing something that I want to say to people, which works sometimes and which is valid. But also, like, you have to think, is this something that people would want to read? Is it interesting? Like, maybe you're just expressing something, but that's for you. Like, that's just, like, is the way it's presented something that you would want to consume? And is it, interesting? And would you, like, does it look good enough for you to buy it? Does the story have a strong enough message? And, like, is the human journey something that is relatable enough with that you would... You would remember this story like years and years down the line.
Okay.
So yeah, it's sort of just an easy way to get into the headspace of making something that is worth your time and worth your reader's time.
Cool. Okay, well, thanks a lot. And next time you come to Tokyo, we can do a video on tangents.
Oh yeah. Tangents. Real life tangents or comic tangents, or just...
Or we could just go off on a tangent about tangents.
Yeah, we can, and just talk about obscure sci-fi manga for like an hour. It's totally fine. Yeah, definitely. I do have to go to Tokyo again. I would love to.
Irene Strychalski is on Twitter at Renie Draws. That's RENIEDRAWS. Coming up, Jason McNamara on creative consulting for a basketball team and knowing when to let go of a failing artistic collaboration. Thanks to our patrons. This week I've just released vintage episode number 115 from February 18th, 2008, an interview with Chris Staros from Top Shelf Productions. This coming week I'll be releasing number 114, featuring Mulele and me talking about the state of his comics career at the time, the Spider-Man One More Day event, the Hollywood writers' strike, and more. Wow, nostalgia. Watch for it at the end of your podcast feed, or on our Facebook page, or at patreon.com/deconcomics, where you can pledge a monthly amount to keep the show going and unlock more vintage episodes. We appreciate your support.
Are you willing to follow me on a journey and risk getting lost in the swirling maze of past ages, protected only by our red indestructible capes as we break through the final unexplored realm of the time barrier to explore the fantastic Silver Age adventures of the world's greatest hero, Superman? If so, join me each week on the Superman Fan Podcast, as together we'll follow the Man of Steel, his cousin Supergirl, and his closest friends, Perry White, Lois Lane, Jimmy Olsen, Lana Lang, Batman and Robin, and others in Superman's never-ending quest to defend truth and justice in the pages of Action Comics, Superman, World's Finest Comics, Superman's pal Jimmy Olsen, and Superman's girlfriend Lois Lane. Go to the supermanfanpodcast.blogspot.com, available on iTunes and most other podcast aggregators. You can also follow the podcast on Facebook, Twitter, Tumblr, Medium, Flipboard, and Stitcher. And after you listen, feel free to send email to supermanfanpodcast@gmail.com. And unless you request otherwise, I look forward to reading your comments on future episodes. And don't forget to wear your red indestructible cape, standard safety equipment for traveling through the time barrier.
Better than I did last night. I woke up a couple times, but basically I slept from 8:30 to 6 a.m.
You also have jet lag too, right?
Well, and I've been...
You're in the wrong way across time zones.
The past week I was in all 4 time zones of the continental U.S., not in order. I started out in Central Time, then Eastern, then Mountain, then Pacific.
Yeah, so you're nuts.
Yeah, I might still be on Central Time, I'm not sure.
So whenever they talk about like book tours, they always say start on the West Coast and work your way east.
Yeah, it was just, the problem was trying to sequence things. It was like, if I go straight from one to the other, then I'm going to miss somebody who will be out of town when I'm there. Or I'll be trying to do interviews while I'm really, really jet lagged, although that was what happened anyway in Minneapolis. But finally I worked out this sequence and it mostly worked.
Yeah.
So... Okay, I'm talking with Jason McNamara, who were you on the podcast again after the time we talked in San Francisco with Deb and John?
Yes,
I was on.
We talked about the Rattler very briefly when it came out their Image.
Right. Okay.
I remember because with the time zone, it was early, and I was staying at a friend's house, and I had to put a blanket over my head and go into their bathroom and talk to you. So I remember that one. That was memorable.
And the Rattlers now made you rich and famous. So how does it feel?
Loaded. Let me just chop some lines here. Yeah, I don't know what to spend my money on.
But yeah, that was a book that Greg Hinkle drew, fresh off of Airboy.
It's actually vice versa. It came out after
in terms
Airboy.
of the order they were released in, yeah. But yeah, I know Rattler was in the pipeline for quite a while.
It was. I thought we would take all the great goodwill that Airboy would garner, and that would help the Rattler sales.
So you were waiting for Airboy to come out, even though you didn't know about it when you did the story.
No, we knew by the end. So we worked in James Robinson into the Rattler. So by the time we got to the end of the Rattler, we knew what Greg's next project was going to be. And he and I and James actually went out. And this was when James Robinson was still drinking. And we had a night, not unlike the Airboy night. So I felt like that project, I had a lot of goodwill towards that project before it started.
Okay.
Yeah, I was supportive of Greg and James and what they were doing.
Okay. And now you're living in Portland. You said you've been here 3 years?
2 years, I think.
2.
Yeah, I've been up here for 2 years.
Okay, because I think when I saw you in San Francisco, had you moved to Crockett by then?
Probably, yeah. At that point, I had moved to Crockett, which is a great little town that I sort of think Stephen King created and just dropped on the West Coast. It's this creepy, weird, little charming town that I really, really enjoy. Did you ever read, there's a book called Ringside by Image?
No.
That, well, it takes place, I was reading it, I picked it up, and I'm reading it, and I realized it takes place in Crockett. I'm like, I drank at that bar, and I did this at that bar, and somebody actually knew what they were doing, and they went out there, and they, so it's a good book.
I see. Okay.
So I'm not the only one who knows Crockett. People do love Crockett if you find it. It's a hidden little gem. Before you go over the bridge, if you're on the 5, on the 80 rather. It's the last exit before you cross the bridge to Vallejo. And I highly recommend it. We love that place, but everything in the Bay Area is sort of out of your financial reach as soon as you step away from it. So now I'm in Portland, where people in Portland hate Californians. So I talk with my New York accent when I'm around here.
I see.
People are like, where are you from? I'm like, I'm from Long Island, and I just want a glass of water.
That's right. That's where you grew up. Right?
Yeah, I did grow up on Long Island. Yeah, the North Shore of Long Island. No one lies about that. It was me, Amy Fisher, and Billy Joel. We would just hang out all the time, and we had some good times.
And Ron Richards.
Yes. Ron Richards, who I tormented at my comic shop. I did. I was like, your taste in comics is garbage. So I've been paying for that for 30 years.
So what's been going on creative-wise?
So the Rattler opened a lot of doors for me. Not all of them were in comics proper, but I've been doing a lot of corporate work. So this past spring I wrote a video game for Maximum Games. They haven't announced it yet. I did some dialogue work on another game that will be announced soon. And I've been working as a creative consultant for the Golden State Warriors, the basketball team.
So why do they need a creative consultant?
Why do they need?
Yeah.
I'm not on the team. I will not be coming off the bench. So they are owned. First of all, like most brands and organizations now are learning to embrace the story of their company and their brand, and the Warriors have a great story. And most sports teams, their whole it's about engagement, right? How do you engage with fans? The players in the court is the majority of how they do that, but they actually have many, many channels and many different ways in which they engage their fans and keep them engaged in the story of the team, right? So if you love a basketball team or a football team, you love that team pretty much whoever's on it or not, right? So you are loyal to that brand and the story of that, and sometimes these players function more as actors in that story. So why do the Golden State Warriors need a low-rent graphic novelist on the payroll? To be clear, I'm a freelance consultant, so I consult with them. I'm not an employee. I can't get anybody tickets to a game, and that's usually when people lose interest in what I'm saying.
Okay, see you next time. No.
Walking away. I've never met any of the players. I've only been to a few games. I love the organization. I think they're great guys. They're very smart people. But they are... One of their owners is Peter Guber. And Peter Guber is a Hollywood producer. He produced the Michael Keaton Batman movies. And he's written many books about storytelling and engaging people through stories. His belief, as a guy who's made many movies, that from caveman painting illustrations on the wall to sports teams, comic books, movies, graphic novels, it's all the same thing. It is all storytelling and engagement, and that's how people want to experience the world. For example, we get angry now when we're forced to sit through traditional advertisements. Right before your video, I just scream "F you" every time. I'm like "F you" until it's over because I'm so mad my time is being taken away from me. I'm usually skipping through that so I can get to something that's also an advertisement, but it's a story-based advertisement, whether it's a trailer or something. It's like we're addicted to story. We always have been, and brands are getting smarter now about how to turn their product or their brand or their I don't want to say brand a million times, but how to turn all that into a story that engages and where to put those story pieces. So running an organization like that is not unlike running a crossover at Marvel Comics. You have the main storyline, and then you have all these little branching storylines. So Secret Wars pops up here, and there's different facets to that story, different entry points to that story. And it may be through Facebook Messenger, it may be through Twitter, and it may be through a physical experience in the arena. But all these things work in Congress to not be redundant, not to trip over one another, but to work in concert to tell an overall story that keeps you engaged and keeps you excited. So I perform a 0.00001% of that experience with the Warriors, but I would pay them to be in that room and to be around people that are so smart and so good at what they do. And oddly enough, like that job, that role has put me in the room. I met Stan Lee through that job. Stan Lee was doing a Marvel Day at Giants Stadium, the baseball team across the bay, and they invited us to come over and check it out, and so I got to meet Stan Lee very briefly. I got to meet Axel Alonso through that job. He's he grew up in the Bay Area. He's a big Warriors fan. He's come out. So it's been really interesting, but also meeting Peter Gruber, who is a Hollywood producer and who makes big decisions and has had a long career, long career. He started in the 70s, I think, doing The Deep. Peter Francis' The Deep. So to be in the room with him and have him tell me about storytelling and engagement, and like that to me, I'm like a kid in a candy shop. Like that, I'm so in love with that job. And people, I don't think of myself. I think of myself as a storyteller, but I'm still a fan, and I still want to learn. And I think the best way to do that is to be around people that are smarter than you. So people always go, "You're working in sports?" I'm like, it is storytelling. It is the greatest storytelling of all time. I mean, I think coming from the comic book world, I don't realize that tens of hundreds of million people watch the NBA Finals, right? Like, that eclipses anything you could ever do in comics. Like, what's the best-selling comic, right? Walking Dead, 75,000. Those are great numbers. Can you imagine, why can't 160 million people buy The Walking Dead every month? That is my goal. That would be fantastic. So yeah, it's storytelling on a grand scale with so many facets, and I'm just, I'm like one of the kids at the Willy Wonka thing. I'm just getting fat on it.
So you told me you had been working on something that took up a lot of time and kind of fell apart.
Right. So the way I work is probably not the best way to work if you want to make it in comics. So pay attention, kids. Usually people do a pitch and they send it out. And if it gets approved, yay, you make it. If it doesn't get approved, well, you tried and you move on to something else. I'm super stubborn, and there are certain stories that I'm just going to tell, whether I think anybody wants them or not. That was with the Rattler. Nobody wanted to publish the Rattler. Nobody wanted to look at Greg's work. No one wanted to take that chance. And we did it on our own for a year, and then we introduced it to Kickstarter, and it could have failed. And we could have just put that big book in a drawer and just forgot about it and had our hearts broken. But it found an audience. It found Greg a career, right? He's doing great. Black Cloud is doing phenomenal for him. And it got me many jobs doing that Kickstarter. So the way I like to work is I like to work on a project and get it really far along before I think about who's going to publish it, or whether, at this point, you want to workshop it with the creative team and know what you're bringing, what you can do, and you don't have that freedom if you have a work-for-hire situation. You have to work very quick, turn things in, and maybe you get a say over how it looks, maybe you don't. So sometimes that the pitfalls of that is I've been working on a few projects, but one of them cratered just yesterday, so it's very fresh in my mind. I came up with a concept and written a script, and I approached an artist friend of mine who we had done some other stuff together, and it seemed like it was going to work. I like I don't want to mention his name because he's a really good dude, and I don't want to make sense of him dragging anyone through the mud. He does good work, and he likes my work, and we're fans of each other's stuff, and it just never, there was always delays, and it just never sort of took life on its own. So the pages just weren't forthcoming, and at a certain point, we would say, well, maybe, what can we do to make this work? And we tried many different things, because we both respect each other, our talent and our time, and we both care about the story. And then this week, we had a long talk, and I said, maybe this is just a story that you want to read, and it's not a story you want to create. And maybe it's more my story and not your story. Maybe I think we started the relationship wanting to work together, and I sort of took a story that was pretty far along in my mind and tried to graft his style and his work to it. And it just didn't, we just had to throw our hands up and just say, hey, maybe this isn't the right project for us. But that's a year of development that we have to eat. And the flip side to that is, if we didn't, we could have had the same conversation in a year again. So I think it's better, I think by page 10 or 12, if the collaboration is working, it's working. It really becomes a thing of itself. You get up in the morning and you cannot wait to work on something. You're almost frothing at the mouth to do it. Anytime I'm doing a work-for-hire gig or something, there's always this thing on the side of my desk that I can't wait to get to. Mm-hmm. And if I can do 8 hours, for this paying job, then I'm going to spend the rest of the night, I make myself a couple of stiff Manhattans, and I'm going to knock out the stuff that I'm dying to do, the stuff you're passionate about. And when something feels workmanlike, you can tell. It's not bad, it's just not zingy, right? It's just not leaping off the page. It's not, you can just tell when something feels, not uninspired, but just painterly.
Kind of flat.
Yeah, it's not bad work. It's just, you can just tell the person was getting through it, and they weren't like in love with it. And you never want to be the person who, it's like a relationship. You don't want to force anyone to stay with you. You want to say, look, man, if this isn't like, if you're not like super passionate about this, I get it. I understand it. And we had a long talk, and there was no hard feelings, and it was just like, if you would rather be doing something else, then do it. Don't feel like you have to do something. And this happens when you work with your friends. They will stick by you. Whereas a stranger on the internet would say, hey, man, this isn't my thing. Good luck.
Right, yeah.
See, it wouldn't want to be you. But a friend will stick by you, and that's the what can go wrong in a friend. When you work with your friends, it is very dangerous. It could go wrong. So I have another friend who does a lot of books for Image and Oni, and we're homies, and I'm always like, maybe we should never work together because I like you and we're friends, and you don't want to. Books aren't more important to me than friendship. If I had to choose between having a book or being friends, I would choose that. And Greg and I had a long development process on the Rattler, and we are still friends and we still talk. And
the book came out?
And the book came out, and it looks great, and I could pick it up at any time and go, I love this. I flip through it, and I think, it's a pretty dark book. It's not everyone's cup of tea, but to me, that is the ultimate crystallization of what I can do as a creator, and as like a producer at work. So if I never did another book again, it would not be heartbroken, because I did the perfect book in the Rattler. That is a Jason McNamara book from front to back, and I'm just so happy that I did it with Greg. And every page to me sings. I hear the music. He crushed it. So, and that was not always an easy collaboration, mostly because there was no light at the end of the tunnel. There was no like, okay, it's going to come out, once you're done, Company X is going to put it out, and all these people are going to see it. We were just doing it like in our garage, like a little punk rock garage band. And without that, I can't be the only cheerleader on a project. You have to look forward to it being out in the world. And the middle of any project is, it's like the middle of a movie. It's always the character low point. Like, am I ever going to get out of this muck? So a long project, especially with one creator on his own. He was penciling, inking, and coloring that, Greg. But he got through it, and it's gorgeous. And he's super proud of it, and I am, and we're still friends, and success.
Yeah.
So it's hard to say this thing is just not working out, and I think you would be happier somewhere else, and I could take it and go somewhere else, and the project is just stalled. It's just, I have a lot more project management experience than I had probably 10 years ago, so I can say, hey, this is not working out, what can we do? If I look at it objectively, I'm like, look, this is a project in peril. And I've worked on many projects that work well, they move quick. I have another project I'm doing with Dominic Stanton, and he's a big artist who works for Marvel, DC, Boom. And I pitched him an idea, and he said yes, and I threw him his pages, and they were done in a couple of days, and the pitch was out, and it was like the most painless thing I'd ever gone through. But he was, he had a lot of other projects, but he's like, I'm into this, I want to do it, let's do it. And it was done immediately, and it's gorgeous, and hopefully that'll come out next year. But again, I don't know him. So he's either going to say, we were introduced to an editor, he's going to say, nah, not for me, or yeah, I want to do this. You don't ever want to have someone stay with you through obligation, professionally or personally.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I feel like I've heard, of course there have been cases of friends or even, married couples or whatever who do creative stuff together, and sometimes it works great and sometimes it ends the relationship.
Right.
So, yeah, it's kind of a tricky thing, a little bit risky.
It is. Well, funding is an issue, right? So if I'm self-funding something, it's different. If Company X says, we want this from you guys, we're working for them, right? And if there's any problems, we take it up with them, and they're sort of leading it. When creators lead themselves, and I like to lead myself, and I like to project manage and do things on my own, it is harder to get things going. There is more, God, what do you want to say? It just moves slower, right? Because it's just Jason. If it's a little late, it's just Jason. It's not some guy in an office somewhere. But
you have somebody else imposing a deadline
Yes.
on you. You have to be the one who does that, and then
Yeah.
people can get upset with you for being an a-hole or whatever.
Well, I don't mind people getting to me, but like I can't. If I wear every hat, they're not taking it seriously, right? Like I can't be the editor and the producer and all these things. So yeah, teams. There's money. There's less to fight about. There's less worry, right? Like if we do this, we're going to make X amount of money, or someone's paying us a page rate. If you're doing it all for back end, it's hard to keep that momentum and that pace. And I firmly believe that like a body in motion stays in motion. And projects that get done quick look good. And when projects take a long time, the energy isn't there on the page. It feels like a slog for the creators, and the readers can sense that. So I thought it was better to walk away now than to have this conversation later and later and later. When we were 30 pages in or 40 pages in, at that point you can't stop and turn around and say, hey, this isn't the best relationship for us. Like I would work with this guy again. I think he's a really good illustrator. I just think this project didn't gel with him the way the whole team just didn't gel the way I wanted them to gel, and I had to be, say, hey guys, we have a problem. Can we talk about it? Whereas 10 years ago, I would just thrown a table over, made some mom jokes, and walked out of the room. So this is the grown-up version of problem solving, and nobody wants to have anyone mad at them, or nobody wants to. I think the guy I was working with also would rather stay friends than to take this to a place where we can't recover.
Yeah.
I mean, it's comics, but it's also just comics, right? Like I'm not going to climb over someone's body to get a job or throw someone under the wheels.
Yeah.
Jason McNamara is on Twitter at Jason McNamara. That's MC with no A. Tell us what you think. Write us at mail@deconstructingcomics.com, Twitter at deconcomics. Like our Facebook page or join our Facebook discussion group. Find all the links on the right sidebar at deconstructingcomics.com. We're also on YouTube, on the Comics Podcast Network at comicspodcast.com, and on comicon.com, where our new episodes appear a few days before they show up anywhere else. Also, please give us a review on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Google Play, iHeartRadio, or wherever you find podcasts. We really need more listeners to give us reviews and help us stand out from the many comics podcasts that are out there. Our theme is from bensound.com. Next Thursday on To the Batpoles, we'll be discussing Adam West's final performance as Batman, with William Shatner as Two-Face, in the new animated movie Batman vs. Two-Face. Look up To the Batpoles wherever you find your podcast or at tothebatpoles.libsyn.com. We're finally in the home stretch of episodes from my summer trip around the U.S. In Portland, I did a bunch of interviews with creators at Helioscope Studio, and on Monday you'll hear the first two, with longtime Marvel and DC inker, penciler, and writer Carl Kiesel, and graphic novelist Dylan McConis. Till then, this is Tim, and thanks for listening to Deconstructing Comics.